And thanks to the organizers for putting together this wonderful conference. Already, I feel like I've learned a lot from Luis Comfort's presentation. Thank you, Luis. The session one is about to begin. I'm the moderator for this session. So we have 4 presenters here. We'll go to the presentation will probably last between 15 and 20 minutes. I'm going to try to make sure that we stick to the time because I don't want to piss anybody off because lunch is afterwards. So when I'm showing you that it's 1 minute to go, please try to round up. Thank you. So the first person on the panel that will be presented today is Don Schramm. He's the director of University of Wisconsin Disaster Management Center here in Madison, Wisconsin. So, Don, please.
Turn on all the machinery. Are we okay? Yeah, very good. Okay. Thank you very much, Abdul, and thank you again to the organizers of this conference for inviting me to participate. I really appreciate it. What we're going to do for the next 15 minutes is look at preparedness before relief, a sustainable development approach. I was very pleased to hear Louise mention that in her presentation, and also really like the phrase of adaptive iterative learning. I think that's an important thing and something that we have been trying to do for the last 30 years. Our program has been around for 30 years, and this is going to be kind of a 30-year case history of the Disaster Management Center at the University of Wisconsin, with an idea that other universities, other organizations can take the same model and use it. Start with the basic proposition. Development is not sustainable in hazard-prone areas without adequate preparedness and disaster risk management. There are lots of disaster failures that better preparedness might have prevented. Chile, Venezuela, and Laos. There are disaster failures that better development might have mitigated. Perhaps not prevented, but mitigated. Back when we set up the Disaster Management Center in 1982, this was the so-called disaster cycle, starting with the event, response, rehabilitation, reconstruction, prevention, mitigation, preparedness, and alert. The idea of circling all of that with development is something that a man named Fred Cuny came up with in 1983. And Fred was one of the founders of our Disaster Management Center. The idea that development occurs in disasters and that disasters occur in development. If you look, there are, and this is out of one of our early courses, on a negative, on the negative side, disasters obviously can set back development. We know that happens all the time. And I'm sure that all of you have examples of that. And I'm guessing that all of you in your work have examples of each of these, that there are times when development can increase vulnerability. There are times when development can reduce vulnerability, and there are always times when disasters can provide development opportunities. So, a disaster preparedness framework. This is, again, something that we developed with the help of field practitioners almost 30 years ago. A framework for disaster preparedness, looking at issues like vulnerability assessment, information systems, response mechanisms, planning, institutional framework, warning systems, rehearsals, resource base, and public education and training, which is actually the key to what we do at the Disaster Management Center, public education and training. Let me go back a minute, and before I go there, ask if anybody has any questions about that as a basic framework for disaster preparedness, disaster management. And it's evolving. I love the phrase, as you said, adaptive and iterative learning. What we're talking about here is just a basis, just the simplest start, based on experience from field practitioners over the years. Okay, no questions? What does distance learning mean to any of you? Anybody?
Online.
Online. Well, of course, we're in the 21st century. Anybody else? When I say distance learning, what does it mean? It means a lot more than online. Distance learning history here at the University of Wisconsin began in 1891, taking courses out to teachers and mechanics. USAFI. Does anybody know what USAFI stands for? The U.S. Armed Forces Institute. Began during the Second World War. It was managed here at the University of Wisconsin. Correspondence courses for U.S. Armed Forces. And then a variety of other techniques, electrolyters, video cassette courses, satellite courses, many media, Whistling Web, Live Meeting, Blackboard, Moodle, leading to web conferences and webinars, and now to social networks. So distance learning began many years ago. Today, when I ask you what is distance learning, you say online. In fact, the idea of distance learning back in 1891 was that the boundaries of the university are the boundaries of the state, and that is the so-called Wisconsin idea. And that was the genesis of the Disaster Management Center. The Disaster Management Center combines university extension, outreach, public service, one of the pillars of higher education, my department, engineering professional development, an organization actually that was formed out of USAFI back in 1940 and is the longest standing organization doing continuing education for architects, engineers, scientists in the U.S. We've been doing it since the mid-40s. And the Disaster Management Center was set up to combine the experience that we had in engineering professional development and university extension had, so that the boundaries of the university became the boundaries of the world. Because our center was set up to work internationally at a distance. We do nothing in the U.S., we do very little here in Madison. It looks like slides are advancing on me. Back then, and even today, disaster management is much beyond engineering. This is, again, from one of our earlier courses, looking at the variety of issues in disaster management, from preparedness to mitigation to vulnerability analysis, looking at scientific analysis, looking at logistics, looking at a variety of things that we're going to hear about today. But the important thing is that disaster management is multidisciplinary. It isn't just engineering. It isn't just health. It isn't just logistics. There are a variety of topics within disaster management. We convened with a little bit of help from OFDA, the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, a very small advisory board looking to find field practitioners who had experience in disaster management back in 1981. They met here in Madison with Fred Cuny and several other colleagues, and Fred's concept of linking disaster and development was a key focus of the program, so that we looked at preparedness before relief. Relief is important, response is important, but being prepared for that is even more important. The advisory board also asked us to use a distance learning focus because it was an international program aimed at individuals throughout the world. Course development began in 1982 with no resources at the university. We looked for external funding for everything. Courses were first piloted in 1984, these self-study courses, and at that time, distance education was correspondence or self-study. Distance education was text that was mailed out and sent back. Self-study was a little bit easier than correspondence because you didn't have to mail things back and forth several times. The courses were totally self-contained, and the courses were developed by several hundred practitioners from around the world, and then prepared and edited here at the University of Wisconsin. At first, they were available in English and Spanish, and in 1994, we began something called the Disaster Management Diploma, which was always the goal, a distance learning diploma. Over the past 30 years, we've probably had 40 to 50,000 individuals who have taken one or more of our courses and/or registered as candidates for the diploma. The diploma is an independent, individualized study, distance delivery, 600 hours of study. Required are 250 hours from our self-study curriculum, the curriculum developed by field practitioners, 250 hours of professional electives from any organization anywhere in the world, and then finally a 100-hour professional study project, which typically takes the form of a case history or case study of a disaster. These are the courses. The only required courses for the diploma are aim and scope of disaster management and principles of management. Then there are a variety of other courses that, again, were all developed with external support from a variety of organizations. And they're all, at this point, they are all online named. They are all available as downloadable PDFs. We encourage anybody anywhere in the world to download those courses and study them. If they want to earn credit, continuing education credit, that's when they pay the enrollment fee. And the enrollment fees are typically between $200 and $300 a course. This is for a 20 to 35-hour course, self-study. We also did a lot of work with a variety of other organizations outside of the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. With the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in the 80s, we helped them set up their first training program, emergency management training program for refugee emergency management, and helped them develop training modules and workshops in over 65 countries. It also helped UNHCR begin their own training service and their own training program. In the 90s, we worked with UNDP to help them in a program that combined the work of UNDP with what is now OCHA, what was then UNDRO, the Disaster Management Training Program. Again, creating training modules and workshops in 40 countries, looking to develop local resources and local expertise in the area of disaster management linked to development. And then finally, something called the Prevention Consortium, which unfortunately no longer exists. Its last secretariat was at the IFRC, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies in Geneva. It started off in the World Bank with Alcira Kramer. But we ran for them an applied research grant program which actually managed 150 small hazard risk research grants for young professionals from about 50 developing countries. A very successful program. So, at the Disaster Management Center, education comes in many forms. Those are some of the self-study courses up on the left. We do a lot of workshops worldwide for UN agencies, NGOs, governments, individual organizations, in many contexts, from classroom to in the field. A couple of lessons learned. Actually, 5 lessons learned. And hopefully this will help others do the same sort of thing. Understand your potential clientele. That's why we set up an advisory board. Had them give us information. Work with field professionals. As I said, probably close to 200 field disaster management professionals have been involved in the courses that we have developed over the last 30 years. We don't pretend to have all the expertise here in Wisconsin. We go to the field where the expertise is. Use media effectively and efficiently. Back in the 1980s, the media for distance learning was paper and text. Now it's online. That's why we now have online downloadable PDFs for the self-study courses, and we do a lot of webinars and web conferences. Keep costs competitive. Again, since all of our course development funds came from outside the university, we were able to maintain a fairly low cost for the courses once we had a critical mass of courses available. Use blended learning. The idea of combining face-to-face learning with distance learning is very important. We're in the process. We've done that several times for NGOs, and we're in the process right now of working with UNHCR to develop a program to do just the same thing in one of their areas of interest. Finally, provide open learning materials. The idea of the MOOC is something that we really looked at 30 years ago, making course materials available to anyone who wanted them. anywhere around the world to help them develop their own program and take what we have as a basis and build on that. So the earlier cycle of disaster management would in fact become a spiral that goes up as we look at disaster prevention and sustainable development, leading to a higher development stage. That's why I like the idea of adaptive iterative learning, and that's what we do. Questions?
You can leave questions to the end.
I can leave questions to the end also.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, Don. The next presenter is Naim Kapuku.
Okay, good morning again. I need to find my presentation first. Okay, good morning again. I'm Kapuku from the University of Central Florida. So when we did the program, we looked at some key elements of disaster relief and humanitarian assistance. And the program is formed accordingly by the planning committee of the workshop. Even though they put me in a special thanks to me, but almost everything done by those young people at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I did help them identify some key people, such as yours. So what I did as part of my presentation, from our team, my understanding is we don't have equal time for the presentation, which is fine. I will keep my as short as possible, probably 10 to 12 minutes. And some of the ideas were presented by Dr. Comfort. A couple of things about the Japan earthquake, and something will be highlighted in Haiti by Akim later on. And why I did pick this topic, I've been doing research on emergency management, trying to avoid emergency management after my dissertation. I did it in 2003 under the supervision of Dr. Louis Comfort at the University of Pittsburgh. And when I moved to Orlando in 2003, we had too many hurricanes, 4 in less than 6 weeks in 2004, the Katrina, and so many others. And what I tell my students, if you're in the field of emergency management, disaster research, you're not out of research agenda at all. There is always something to do. And also I do research on nonprofits and their role in disaster management. So as part of this presentation, I said, how can I combine the two of my research field into one topic and combine this, the philanthropy in disaster and humanitarian relief. And as part of the presentation, what I'd like to do, brief background on what we mean by philanthropy in disaster relief, and the philanthropic giving in response to disasters and crises caused by human unrest, for example. And what are the characteristics of giving during disasters? There are some differences between giving during disaster time versus normal time. And I will provide some frameworks and some key trends in national campaigns and giving in response to humanitarian relief or disaster response as well. And I have 4 cases, brief 4 cases as examples, and some conclusions. So what I did this couple of weeks ago, it doesn't seem there is too much research on philanthropy and disaster management. It seems there is a lot. I mean, in practice, we know that people like to give more during disasters. It doesn't really require too much encouragement. People feel the empathy already if there's a disaster in Haiti or some other part of the country or domestically in certain countries. So there's a tendency people want to give. It doesn't require too much fundraising efforts. So in terms of philanthropy in response to disasters and compared to humanitarian aid. So in response to disasters, seems the people are more willing to give because the example is concrete, Haiti for example, or Japan or other part of the world. In terms of humanitarian assistance, there's a lot of political issues So it requires some significant clarification to convince people to give. And there are several reasons for people to give in response to disasters. Sometimes people feel they need to give and help others. They might help in return when we have something similar. And the tendency among people that we need to help them so they can come back to normalcy as fast as possible. And some emotional reasons as well. So people, especially if there's a cultural similarities or geographic proximity, the people are more willing to give as well. And the highlight, I will come back to this point, in terms of the role of media and how much coverage, or less coverage, more coverage, and its impact to giving in response to disasters and humanitarian aid. So as I mentioned earlier, the philanthropy in response to humanitarian aid is a bit different than response to disasters. It is kind of structured and similar to planned gifts. So it requires a lot of coordination and a lot of emphasis either by government or NGOs or nonprofit organizations to help and provide increased fund and also help capacity in the local places. I believe we have presentations later in the day in helping people coming to Turkey from Syria, for example. And the role in the same case, the media, how is it presented by the media? Is it positively presented or negatively presented? Impacts significantly the way people give in response to humanitarian aid as well. And there are certain ways that the government can utilize incentives to give more to help people in recovery from disasters and also humanitarian aid, such as tax-exempt status. That was a very special case, for example, by the US government, tax exemption that benefits people helping to Haiti, for example. That helps significantly in increasing donations coming from the US to Haiti. So corporate giving, there are several examples how corporates are actually helping in disasters and humanitarian aid. Sometimes organized by corporations, it's kind of the identity of individuals. It's pleasure, really being part of the community, helping. And so sometimes it's organized by individuals. It can be monetary, it can be also time of employees spent in response to disasters or humanitarian assistance. So there are some characteristics in the literature based on a certain disasters in terms of who are giving. Individuals with direct relationship with the countries, for example, or cultural similarities, they do give more compared to others. Again, geographic similarities and something from the psychological theory, survival. So people want to help people survive in this, again, kind of mutually, they would get something similar, helping others in other parts of the world, and when they need something in the future, they will get something similar as well. So this is, I would like to highlight and spend more time in terms of some of the national campaigns in helping in response to disasters and humanitarian aid. So in the literature and based on the several cases I studied, there are three probably frameworks we can discuss. How governments are organizing certain campaigns and how they're helping in impacted areas. So the first is perceived characteristics of the recipients. So is the need urgent, for example? Or the agency is organizing the campaign. The trust, for example. Or blamelessness. Sometimes high level of empathy and sometimes socially acceptable excuse not to help others, for example. If the country is helping to one with similar culture, there is the empathy. If there are significant differences, the people are not willing to give because of they can use it as a socially acceptable excuse. For example, people see instead of helping Japan, they like to help Haiti. People think that the need is urgent in Haiti because of the capacity, but it's not the same in Japan because of the capacity. They can survive, they can help. They have a strong economy, a strong government, strong country, for example. And the second major characteristics, the donor characteristics. Geographical proximity, for example. If the countries have tourists are coming, or migrant population come to the country, they're feeling much willing to give, and also cultural similarities. For example, the countries are voting in similar ways in the United Nations. It impacts the success of campaigns organized by countries. In gain and status of reputation, for example, who else is also donating? And is it something prestigious to do? And material incentives, sometimes, for example, lottery tickets are provided as part of the campaign. That also help increase giving in response to disasters and humanitarian aid. The last point is structural characteristics of the giver regimes. And for example, frequency and media format of campaigns. That helps a lot. And most recently, Dr. Comfort mentioned the role of social media, how social media can be used in enhancing national campaigns and helping people impacted by civil unrest or natural or man-made disasters. And fundraising rules and regulations. What is the structure available in certain countries? They can either hinder or increase donations and assistance. Some are giving fatigue. If there's too much emphasis in the media, people are probably tired of it and sort of giving more. They will probably say, enough, this is too much. And the economic cycle of the country. If the campaigns are during economic recession, there's not too much to give. If there's economic boom, the campaigns are much more successful. And timing of request, this is also important. During Christmas, for example, in certain countries, or during Ramadan in certain countries, that will increase the giving of the individuals and success of national campaigns. And the trust, this is also quite important. Who's organizing? Who are the key figures in the campaign? And there's enough level of trust in terms of giving. How's my time? 2 minutes? So nonprofit organizations play enormous amount of role in disaster response, and also they are really key in the organizations and assets organizing the activities. That includes philanthropy giving as well. Faith-based organizations, these are critical because these are the organizations close to the people. And they are flexible, they can move quickly and help people quite quickly as well. I was doing research in response to Katrina a couple of years ago, and I asked one of my students to do content analysis. And I was checking like weekly basis, is there anything significant? She said, no, it doesn't seem anything significant. It seems local organizations are much more quicker than the federal government. I said, this is important. So they are very close to people, they know the people, and they can mobilize the resources easily. There are a couple cases, I think we will have something on one earthquake, we had something on Haiti and Japan, but I'd like to briefly mention a couple of things in each case. And I have a paper on this, but I will be more than appreciate for you to get the details. 9/11, couple of really successful issues. Of course, this was a very emotional. I remember seeing people driving all the way from Texas to New York and interviewed by national TVs. And someone asked, you did drive with your truck all the way to New York. What are you going to do? I said, I don't know. But I felt I needed to come. So it was very emotional, and there were several fundraising activities were really modeled in the country. For example, 9/11, September 11 Fund initiated hours after the attacks, and it was extremely successful in collecting money and also distributing to the people. We had some unsuccessful activities. For example, Red Cross, they didn't do a good job in terms of collection and coordination. The Haiti earthquake, this was probably one of the most successful in terms of giving organized by the U.S. government and the people and the organizations in the U.S. to Haiti. And if you remember from the presentation from Dr. Comfort, she mentioned there was only less than 15% nonprofit organizations involved in Japan, 75% nonprofits involved in Haiti. And this was, for example, the U.S. government provided significant incentives, and also people helped a lot. Compared to Japan, it wasn't too successful. And I think because of the geographic proximity and also perception of need, very important. So this is another example. I think a couple of things they did were extremely successful. For example, one of the national TV channels organized with the celebrities day-long, night-long activities and fundraising. They contribute themselves and also announce to people who were donating. celebrities, the business people, and influential people in the country, and that helped significantly, like $35 million in one night collected, for example, in helping the victims. There was another interesting activity. My home is your home. So this is again, using social media and TV channels to connect people who are in need of housing. They were actually housed people in Istanbul and other parts of the country. It was quite unique. So they use social media and networking tools to connect people who are in need and people who can provide housing for those people impacted. And Japan earthquake, I think I mentioned briefly earlier. Again, people thought that Japan can do a good job. There was a small tornado actually in the US, and people were saying, you need to help our people first, then Japan. So that was an interesting trend in giving. We have something in need in our home country, then we can help others later on. So I think I will stop in here, but as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't seem there is too much research done in terms of identifying certain trends in philanthropy, giving in response to disasters and humanitarian aid. There is some research focused on social media and funding. But I think we need probably more to identify some key trends and the key frameworks in terms of giving during disaster recovery and also humanitarian. Thank you.
Thank you, Naheem. The next presenter is Jose Ogin Perez. Jose is a professor Rensselaer of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. New York.
Okay, basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk a bit about what should be the role of the civil society in response to catastrophic events. Typically, I'm basically in charge of a large research operation dealing with humanitarian logistics. Basically, we do field work and we do theory, and we do analytical modeling, we do all of that. And basically, what I'm going to tell you is a bit about our key findings. In essence, as Lois mentioned, we are dealing with a socio-technical system. And that's part of the complexity of the problem. It's also part of the solution, because we need to address all of that. In essence, we have a set of social networks that operate the system both in normal and disaster conditions. We have a set of technical activities that have to be performed, and then we have a set of supporting systems over which all of that runs. In essence, restoring the key to reliability is improving the social, improving the technical, and also improving all the supporting systems. And this is basically going to be central to the problem. I have a number of lessons, and then I'm going to talk about what we have found in our fieldwork, and then at the end, we're going to wrap all of things up to give a set of recommendations. Lesson number one, disaster and catastrophes are not the same. And believe it or not, our national response plan doesn't make that distinction. There are books written on what is a disaster from a sociological point of view, but instead of going into that, I'm going to show you 4 pictures that will make the point clear. This is Joplin before, and this is Joplin after. And this thing over here is the path of the tornado. Basically 160 deaths. What do you see here? Well, the rest of Joplin is intact. And the rest of Joplin could come to a rescue, and that basically is what makes the key principle that the locals are the first responders. But not only that, from the logistic point of view, you have the supplies, the critical supplies, there is a lot of them. You have warehouses, businesses, etc., etc. There are multiple points of entry to the place, and basically the locals could come to a rescue, and they do. Now, this is Minami San Rico. This is Minami San Rico before. The hospital that we show is, I believe, right here. Okay. This is Minami San Rico before, and this is Minami San Rico after. As you can see, the extent of the devastation is such that basically there are no local responders. Everybody needs stuff. Everybody needs medical aid and attention. Not only that, there are few entry points. The area is big. That means in the case before that I showed in Joplin, You park a truck in the middle of the area, and that's it. The local distribution is very easy. Here, you need to distribute manpower, you need to prepare them, and that makes things a lot more difficult. And that's why, whenever we go to disasters, the catastrophic events, nothing, the things that we have, the procedures that work well in a smaller sense, do not work here. And all of that is because of the complexity of the local distribution effort. In essence, in the case of this, well, all the help have to come from the other side. In essence, when you do the mathematics of the amount of cargo that has to be transported, basically, that is crystal clear. Second lesson. In essence, as I mentioned before, in catastrophic events, the local distribution becomes the most complex part of the process, and the one that requires the largest amount of resources, which is not the case in the typical disaster. In typical disaster, the problem is to move the cargo to the place, because the local distribution is painless. Here is completely opposite. If you want to see why, it's very easy. Just do the math. This is basically based on the experience in Haiti. This is the number of manpower hours that you need to move a semi-trailer from Santo Domingo to Port-au-Prince, to distribute internally in Port-au-Prince, and then to man the ports. In essence, we're talking about that distributing the stuff requires 60 times more manpower than transporting it to the place. We all know about basically the problem that we had. Anderson Cooper talking about all these idiots here, they don't know how to distribute supplies, etc., etc. Probably most of us remember that. Why is that? Manpower. When we do the mathematics, we found out that delivering critical supplies to 1.5 million to 2 million people living in Port-au-Prince requires about 20 to 25,000 people. What is that? Well, I can tell you. This is about the average size of the U.S. Army division. And basically, if you ask military planners how long will it take them to deploy that kind of manpower, they're going to tell you 3 to 4 weeks. If President Obama decides to invade Wisconsin, it will take 3 to 4 weeks to mobilize one Army division. And this is exactly the same amount of people that you need here. In essence, bringing that amount of manpower to local distributed supplies is completely impossible to do from the other side. We need to exploit the local networks, as I'm going to discuss later. Another issue dealing with philanthropy is basically convergence. After a disaster, there is a process of convergence. Has been studied since 1917. It is the first sociological impact of a study of disasters. People go to the site, but not only people, there's information flowing to the site, and they broadcast their portrayal of the need that basically produces a flow of supplies. And I'm pretty sure this is going to surprise you, but the reality is that the majority of the stuff that gets to disaster is completely useless. Basically, our best estimate, this is basically the problem is that we have basically 3 sets of flows. We have high priority stuff that is needed right then. You have low priority stuff, the material that you might need and you might want to store. And there is all the other stuff that is junk. And that junk represents 60% of the flow. And this is why disaster responders refer to this as the second tier disaster. Humongous problem. We have interviews hundreds of disaster responders, and whenever they talk to you about what is issue number 1, they will tell you unsolicited donations. I believe that the unsolicited is not the best way to classify them, because there are cases in which unsolicited donations are fantastic. We believe it's more correct to classify them according to the level of usefulness. That, in our opinion, is the most correct way to classify them. Now, it's a big problem, humongous problem. All disasters suffer from this. This is basically Katrina, and you see the same parallels in this is basically in Colombia. The Colombians, in my opinion, had the prize for creativity, in the sense that they sent what I thought was the most outrageous donation was this tiger costume. And I remember when I was returning from Japan, I was invited to the NVOAD conference in Kansas City. And when I mentioned the tiger costume, a member of the audience challenged me, and he said, Jose, I have something better. And I told the man, look, nothing beats the tiger costume. And the guy replied, without any trace of hesitation, he said, what about a truckload of sex toys? And I had to bow, I had to tell, man, you really beat me this time. And this is the kind of thing that basically goes to the side. I mean, I could go on and on. This is basically it could basically, you take any disaster. Water is typically a major culprit of this. Water, clothing. This is water that came from Spain. And I took this picture at the border of the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Again, the same. This is the issue. A big chunk of the staff was basically processing clothing that has no use. The same in Tohoku, in Japan. I mean, broken bikes. This is a humongous problem, extremely difficult to solve. Again, this is the Tohoku Convention Center, the Iwate Prefecture Convention Center. This is a place like Madison Square Garden. The second floor of this humongous thing was completely full with clothing that had been donated. And that is one of, they have basically 1/3 of the staff was trying to process all of that. It's saying, Sandy, exactly the same thing. In essence, we need to deal with this. It's a big problem. It requires physical control, we need to stop this useless stuff at the periphery of the impacted area. Letting them go in is a major problem. We need to educate the media, we need to block. Now, after Sandy, we interview a number of disaster responders, and they complain about exactly the same things. Those who said, we do not want clothing, they got 40% of clothing. Now those who didn't say anything, they got 70 to 80%. Big problem. I asked responders, why didn't you tell people that why did you refuse donations? One of them gave me an example that really exemplified the delicate nature of the process. He said, Jose, I'm going to tell you one case, and you're going to understand. It's basically firefighters, and they basically have a collection point. And they said, an elderly lady came driving an old car. I saw the lady, I realized that she was very ill, she was very frail. I didn't want her to get out of the car. But in any case, she got out of the car and took a walker out of the car and walked to the collection point, and then proceeded to donate the walker. Now, how could I tell her that we don't need the walker? You see, and basically, I didn't have the guts to tell her. You see, but that shows how complicated is the problem. During Sandy, I advised the responders, you need to go public and try to prevent all this crazy donation. Let me tell you, they didn't listen to me at all. In fact, they know what I said. No, let's ignore Jose for a moment. Jose is a nice guy, but we simply cannot do that. Because neither the agencies are going to go public, speaking against the wishes of the public. The same with the relief organization. That they are keenly aware of the problem, but they do not want to speak out because they are afraid about unpaid philanthropy. Big problem. Social networks. In Haiti, whenever you need 20, 25,000 people to do local distribution in disasters, you need the locals, cannot come from the outside. I mean, that is the reality. In Haiti, the issue that we had, this thing that we saw in Haiti, is the result, is the product of lack of connectivity with the local social networks. In essence, I'm going to show you how that happened. In essence, this social technical system I mentioned could be represented like a network. And what was the impact of the disaster? The disaster basically decapitated the country. Basically, it killed the entire senior leadership of the UN that is what keep peace and order in Port-au-Prince. It kills the bishop of the Catholic Church that is a force in Haiti. It kills, it destroyed all ministers, 11 out of 12 ministers. We're talking about that the leadership of the country was decapitated, which is what is expected in catastrophic events. Okay. When the tsunami of aid came, they couldn't find interlocutors. They couldn't connect to the locals because the national interlocutor has been completely wiped out. And this is basically the cause of it. Now, what happens here? That, to my great surprise, when I went to Port-au-Prince, I went to Port-au-Prince 10 days after. Just by happenstance, I happened to connect with a group of, improvised logisticians, grassroots logisticians from evangelical churches. And basically, I remember that 10 days after, I'm basically at the border between Dominican Republic and Haiti. And I basically, as I do in all this, I talk to anyone who wants to talk to me. And it happens that these guys are basically, were proceeding to deliver supplies to Port-au-Prince. And I asked them, how is Port-au-Prince? They were, Port-au-Prince is fine. Can be followed by that. Have you had any problems delivering supplies? Because the day before, the trucks that were transporting supplies for the Haitian government were mobbed. And they asked, no, we haven't had any problems. I completely befuddled. I said, do you have enough trucks? I asked that because the New York Times the day before had indicated that trucks were number 3 priority. Number 1, water purification equipment, water, and then trucks. I couldn't believe that. Because basically in most countries there are more trucks than you need. And the guy said, no, we have more trucks than we could possibly have. And I asked the guy, have you been robbed? And the guy said, who is going to rob the church? Because the picture he portrayed completely different than what I had from the international media. And I asked the guy, could we go with you? Absolutely. And here we went to deliver critical supplies. Why is that? Because they had the most important thing. They had the local networks. With funding from the Norwegian government, evangelical churches in Haiti and in the Dominican Republic have been cooperating to create a network to promote peace, development, peace and understanding. When the earthquake struck, that humongous network that includes 11,000 churches sprung into action. It's a high-density network, super connected. Even so, the nodes, that means the church and the leaders, have been impacted. The network was so dense that had always ways to follow to send the cargo. And these people, grassroots logisticians, none of them with training on this, they implemented a 2-echelon logistics system like no other I have seen. They got supplies in the Dominican side. They got supplies in the Dominican side, collected at the warehouse, sent to a staging area in the border, and from this to a seminary in Port-au-Prince, at which the local churches came looking for supply. Let me tell you, it worked like a charm. Better than the UN, the US Army, American Red Cross, and you name, better than all the big guys. Fantastic operation. I was thoroughly impressed. Why is that? Because in disasters, different network topologies surface. Now, if you don't have access to the local network, and you are the UN, you could only man in a small number of pods. I was in Santo Domingo when the guy from the UN told me, Jose, we have a plan for the pods. And I asked, how many pods are you going to have? 12. And I said, Jose, don't say anything because I'm going to kick you out. And I said, 12 pods for a city with almost 2 million people is going to be a disaster, and let me tell you, it was. Now, the network that we found of these churches is something like this. And it's a whole boat. It's like an ant army. And I don't want to be the meaning of this. It's like small units transporting small things with so many of them that they have access. And you also have other cases kind of in between that have some level of integration with the local networks. These two works fairly well. This was a disaster. This is basically where they got. This is the warehouse in Santo Domingo. This is the staging area in Port-au-Prince. And this is basically the seminar. This is a picture I took at the seminar. I mean, this is people from the local churches going to pick supplies at the seminar in it. In essence, after the last disaster, you simply have no place, no time to create the network of distribution. It takes too long. It requires so much manpower. Gathering 25,000 people to do this is a major logistical undertaking. A private sector, integration of the private sector is also important. The case in Japan. Japan, I'm pretty sure some of you don't know that the response in Japan was quite lousy. The Japanese did a lot of preparation, but they were not prepared for a disaster of this nature. They didn't prepare for the distribution effort at all, and that shows. In essence, they were completely unprepared to respond to the disaster. During the first day, none of them, the entire Japanese government didn't do anything to deliver critical supplies. Only there was a big fight in parliament was when they decided to get into action, and that's when they mobilized the Japanese self-defense forces. There was looting, by the way. You didn't see that in the press, but we have plenty of evidence about that. There was a major crisis. Now, what was this is exactly the same as Port-au-Prince, by the way, but there is a divergence point. At the height of the crisis, the private sector companies, Yamato, Nixu, Sagawa, and Akabu, big companies in the food distribution business, they realized that the supply chains that were delivering supplies, that in normal times deliver supplies to the impacted area, had completely stopped. That happens all the time in disaster, by the way. And they approached the government, and they told the government, there is a major crisis on the way, and you don't know it. And the government told them, go away. But don't get into this. The government told them that the aid was something different. And these companies, on their own, they said, we need to dismiss this, we need to disregard this thing, we are going to deploy our assets. And they deploy their assets big time. And that's why Japan didn't become a second Haiti. Just to give you a number, Yamato deployed 700 trucks. 700 trucks at a cost of millions of dollars. And that was what saved the day. In my opinion, these people deserve a medal. You see. Now, they volunteered for a month, and at the end, they encountered the following. They realized that they couldn't keep going, they couldn't keep doing this operation because they want to go broke. And they approached the government. And the government told them, ask the cities to hire you. The cities. What cities? Minami San Rico, that was completely flattened. And they told us, Jose, that was very cruel. Because they were trapped. They couldn't continue because they would go broke. They couldn't live out because their reputation would suffer. And at the end, after a lot of hassle, the prefectures hired them. But that left them very big. In essence, basically, some of the, I'm going to skip this. This is kind of what explains why the construction restoration process worked well. But this is basically that's some lessons that I don't have time to talk about this. What are the key things? We need to engage public sector, private sector. We need to engage the local community, which is the lesson from Haiti. Policy recommendations. We need to create some sort of logistical, maybe I don't know how to call this, to have basically all the layers of society, having them collaborating and having a plan to this. We do not need to design plans for the worst case scenario. That might be an asteroid wiping out planet Earth. We don't need to plan for that. What we need to have is scalable responses. Responses that could be adjusted up or down depending on the circumstances. We need to control convergence. We need to integrate design plans that allow easy integration of outside help. That is a factor. We need to train people. We need to reposition supplies, and we also have to do something on the technology. In catastrophic events, by the way, technologies are typically challenged to the limit because there is no phone, there is no internet, there is no Twitter, Facebook. I mean, all of that is kind of gone. I want to close with this, which is a story about risk communication. That is, in my opinion, the most fascinating finding that we have produced in our fieldwork. When I went to Japan, I went to the beautiful island on Miyajima, which is basically, and I was interviewing these locals, and I asked them about what they do, what did they do after the tsunami. They said, well, we didn't get any warnings. Why? Well, because the warning tower had been toppled by the earthquake. And I said, what did you do? Well, he said, our ancestors taught us what to do. So I'm kind of intrigued by this thing. Your ancestors, yes. They said, well, they were looking, as you can see, there are two hills. This is the top of the hill, this is another top of the hill. He said, well, we went to this hill. I was befuddled by that, but that hill is farther away. Why did you do that? Well, because our ancestors have taught us that if we go to the hill on top, the one of that one over here, that we will die. I mean, same height. I am completely befuddled by, what do you know you die? Well, because our ancestors said that if we go there, two tsunami waves collide. Two tsunami waves? I simply can't disbelieve. And I said, I mean, how do you know that two tsunami waves collide? Well, because it happens 1,000 years ago. I'm completely befuddled by the whole thing. I simply, as skeptical I am, can't believe it. I mean, you say, what do you mean 1,000 years ago? Do you mean a long time ago? No, it was 1,042 years ago. I'm completely, in fact, I was so in the belief that I walk in the dead of the night, with no electricity, I walk, and I found out that in the little water, in essence, in that place, two tsunami waves, one from the front, another from the back, collide. And they did basically what they had said to have done. They went to the hill down below. In essence, 1,000 people were saved by following a lesson. The lesson has been transmitted from the ancestors. In fact, there is a shrine at the bottom of the hill that says, do not come to that hill. If you come here, you are going to die because two tsunamis were all these people went to the second hill that is farther away, and they were safe. And from that point, they saw these two tsunami waves colliding as they did 1,000 years ago. I want to tell you, modern technology didn't do anything to save these people. That message sent to the future by long-gone ancestors did. In essence, these long-gone ancestors saved the children. Thanks a lot. Go ahead, we'll take more time.
Thank you, Jose. Yeah, it's okay. I will try to make up. So it looks like we have about 29 minutes, right? And I would like to leave a lot of time for discussion because it looks like we have a very very interesting papers that have been presented this morning. So I'd like to acknowledge the presence of my co-author, Dr. Grace Chikoto. She's been wonderful enough to join us from the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. So thank you, Grace, for coming. So in terms of, we try to focus on some of the challenges inherent in humanitarian response to the Haiti earthquake. And so that's what we'll be doing today. Outline, I'll talk briefly, I'll probably fly through the background because a lot of it has been said already about Haiti and the devastation. We'll give the definitions of disaster relief and humanitarian aid, and then the response to the Haiti earthquake and some of the challenges and opportunities for us to improve disaster relief and humanitarian aid, and conclude with recommendations. So these are basically information that some of you already know. I'll focus more on what you've not heard this morning. Haiti, in terms of demographic, 95% black, the other 5% is mulatto and white. Geographical area, the size of Maryland, a little bit smaller than Maryland. In terms of religion, is Voodoo and Christianity, and they speak, of course, French and Creole. I would like to talk about the vulnerabilities a little more than what's been said already. We know Haiti is the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, and there's been a lot of political instability in terms of coup over the centuries. There's also environmental degradation. In fact, according to climate experts, Haiti is ranked #1 on the Climate Change Vulnerability Index, and it has only 1% of its forest covers left, so they pretty much eat up all the forest. Compared to a neighboring country, Dominican Republic, they have over 20% of their forest covers, at least intact. Of course, we talked about the weak emergency management system. Luis Comfort talked about the absence of building codes in Haiti, just to mention a few. Background on the earthquake, there's nothing new. We already talked about this, so I'll just move on. In terms of the impact also, this figure of 316,000 actually came, I remember when we were there, we were conducting an interview. We interviewed a morgue director that was attached to the Port-au-Prince General Hospital. And we I just asked him, how many people do you think that died? And he said he thinks over 300,000. That number was a number that was so high that nobody could talk about at that point. But a year later, the government actually came out that the official number is 316,000 people dead. So I thought that was very astonishing. In terms of destruction, about 300 houses affected, 10 million cubic feet of debris and rubble. That caused a lot of problems as well, in terms of trying to move all that out of Port-au-Prince and other areas. In terms of displacement, 1.3 million. Estimates in terms of overall damage has been put to about 7.2 to 13.2 billion dollars. So here we talk about just quick definitions of disaster relief and humanitarian aid. I'll not read that to you. I'll just let you kind of glance at that. So in terms of the response, here in the U.S. we always say disasters are local. So when disasters happen, it's the locals that typically respond. They're the first line of defense, really. And in Haiti, the same happened. The locals were the first. The survivors were the ones that were trying to pull out friends and neighbors and family members that were trapped and trying to kind of help them in some way possible. But of course, we know they lacked a lot of resources to do that. Even the government of Haiti, we said their buildings were destroyed, ministry were affected. Just and I think a day after, they were already trying to mobilize one another to do something about it, even though they lacked the wherewithal to do that. But there was that response from that. So I thought that was very, very important. That's why I put them first. And of course, there were around 129 different countries that responded. I remember when we were trying to count representatives from different countries. I think we only got to 20, but they remember in the canteen. Anyway, so the United States also responded, led by USAID, US military, FEMA, and the other agencies responded. In terms of relief from the US, $1.1 billion was given. Here are some of the pictures that kind of shows. On top there is the one of the US Army bases in Haiti. So Others too responded. The Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CIDEMA, is kind of an agency that focuses on helping member Caribbean nations to respond to emergencies. They were also on hand within 24 hours after the disaster. They are very crucial because they are very close to Haiti, and so they can kind of get to the scene on time. Of course, the United Nations showed up as well, as we all know now, and they implemented the cluster system, which we'll talk more about later. The European Union was there, and the international non-governmental organizations. In fact, people said there's been upward of about 8,000 international non-governmental NGOs working in Haiti at the time of the earthquake, meaning making some people to actually call Haiti an NGO republic. So, in terms of challenges that people have talked about inherent in Haiti, with regards to the humanitarian aspect of the response, lack of coordination among local, international NGOs that showed up, and this is basically because there was what we call convergence. What we talked about, the initial convergence. Everybody just showing up, and everybody has their own agenda, so it was hard to kind of coordinate things. Also, the other problem was the short-term teams that went. For instance, you typically send the first wave of responders. They worked around the clock, so they got tired and left. And for the new ones coming, it was hard to kind of fill that gap. All the gains that were made initially were kind of eroded because the ones that come in at fresh were kind of had to start over and get acclimatized with the situation. There were other contextual factors in Haiti, language barriers. In fact, it was said that some of the initial documents that were sent out after the earthquake were in English, and many of the local folks spoke Creole, and some spoke French. So it was later on they started to try to change those, kind of convert them to other languages that were amenable to the people. Also, the urban setting, we've talked about that already. Some presenters have talked about the urban setting. It's a complicated and complex system. I mean, you have, Port-au-Prince was a city that was built for 50,000 people. As at the time of the earthquake, 2.1 million people were living in Haiti. And in terms of the destruction of structures and the mass fatality issues that occurred, in terms of the number of people killed, it was almost impossible to mount a commensurate response because of the urban setting. And the UN actually admitted that they are not used to responding to disasters that affect urban settings. So this was a big issue for them. And also, of course, there was gross violations of impartiality, universality, neutrality, the kind of principles that humanitarian aid and should kind of focuses on. For instance, we studied the mass fatality management aspect of things, and we realized that the UN, for instance, which lost, I think, about 50 people from their side or so, or more than 50 people from their side, focuses on recovering their bodies first, before focusing on trying to help others, the Asians, so to say. Similarly, on the US side, we sent a DMOT team over there to recover the remains of United States citizens. They simply went in, did their job, did not, try to to recover the bodies of Asians. So there was a lot of impartiality, people trying to just, selfish goals, really focus on selfish goals. So what we also look at in this paper is the fact that mass fatality incidents, the Haiti earthquake itself is what we call, is an example of a mass fatality incident. And this is an incident which leads to, according to David's definition, that leads to a lot of loss of life, to the extent that the local community don't have the resources to process the remains of the dead. And we're not arguing in this paper that during the response phase we should prioritize resources to people that are, to recovering the dead and processing the dead and all that. But we think that it's important to address this need, because as a humanitarian worker trying to go to the field and trying to give people food and water, you come across dead bodies. People sitting by the dead body of their loved ones. What are you going to do? Are you going to tell them, okay, you want food at that time? And also, there's some sort of impact, psychological impact, on that kind of scene on people that are doing the humanitarian workers. I'm going to give people food, and I say, dead bodies, I'm not prepared for that. So we think that there's need for us to kind of look at this critically in terms of trying to cross-train maybe humanitarian workers in being able to perform some basic mass fatality management process. So in terms of mass fatality management, there are different stages: body recovery, body storage, preservation, identifying the person, returning the body to family, and then disposition. And I can maybe later talk about this, what we found in Haiti. But we think that being a mass fatality management incident, it creates unique challenges, okay, for those humanitarian workers. Some, it was an earthquake. So the aftershocks that came after, in fact, after the main earthquake of 7.0, there was a big aftershock of 6.0 that came immediately. So people that are there to help, the humanitarian workers are there to help too, there were a series of aftershocks that occurred that prevented them from going into and performing their duties. Debris, we talked about 10 million cubic meters of debris. That impacts or did not allow people, the humanitarian workers, to kind of access the areas that they needed to. Also lack of resources to mobilize, to rescue, to remove bodies from that were trapped. That was also another problem. And that one focused more on the management of the corpses. Also psychological stress I talked about on the part of the aid workers, and of course the stench that was occurring. Even when we went, there was still noticeable areas that had stench of corpses. That's not a salubrious environment for humanitarian workers to be. So in terms of opportunities, we know that this is a mass fatality incident, so it creates an opportunity for us to usher in new ways of thinking. Berkland's work is very, very appropriate here. And so utilizing resources from all the donors, all the international community, the Asian diaspora, which donates, we said about an average of almost $2 billion yearly back home. All the resources can go into trying to improve the system. Coordination and collaboration with the local folks is important, and we need to use that opportunity, especially from the lessons that we've learned from Haiti, that we did not, UN for instance, did not work with local folks. And we talked with Redo Jose's presentation about how important these local networks are. So that gives us an opportunity to be able to collaborate more with them. Political stability. Now Haiti has political stability. Now is the time to usher ways of doing things and build upon that stability that now Haiti has not had before. So quickly, a recommendation. So we need the humanitarian community to develop a better understanding of the urban context. These are complicated areas that have structures, a lot of people in a small area, sometimes different small access points. We need to understand this context better so that we can be able to work and distribute relief when need be. Inclusion of local communities. This seems to be a no-brainer after the talk we've heard this morning. So it's important for you and other international communities to realize that local folks are the ones that know the nooks and crannies of their communities, and we need them, and they are very, very indispensable when we're trying to distribute humanitarian aid. Also, mass fatality management in the mass fatality management area can offer cross-training. At least, for instance, you can just train humanitarian affairs, aid workers on simple things as when you're around the corpse, don't look at the faces of corpse. People have talked about that, the psychological impact that has on people. So just little things so they can be able to do their job better. And lastly, the international community has to focus on reducing the vulnerabilities that are inherent in Haiti. If we don't do that and in other places, and think that we can just show up and do relief effort, that is not the long-term way to sustain or make a resilient community. I think that's it. I hope I didn't. So, I think we apologize for going too long. I think it's just so fascinating topics and presentations that we got too carried away. But it looks like we have 14 minutes for questions and answers. So we'd like to address that.
Thank you for these very interesting presentations. I have a question that's sort of directed at both Jose and Abdul Hakim.
Okay.
I'm interested in this issue of using the sort of local social networks, because one of the first things that the agency that I was working with in Haiti did was distribute cash through local church systems, which was very quick and very easy. There's no choke points for cash, not in the same way as clothing, for example. But one of the difficulties is that that social network is much more difficult to hold accountable because there's not a locatable sort of center of power that you take your petition to. You don't, and they're networks that are not used to the politicization that will happen once you start distributing resources through them. And also, they sometimes leave out important sort of popular or vulnerable populations that are not kind of plugged into those networks. So I was interested in. I agree with you, but I'm wondering if there's sort of, either of you had thoughts about how you manage some of those problems with using local social networks.
Yeah, we have, I agree. Right. Okay, let me tell you, we have thought about these things. There is an issue with, the reality is that once you do the math for large disasters, I'm not talking about small ones, there is no alternative but using the local network. There is no. What is what we are recommending? Imagine that you, before the disaster, that we identify what are the reputable, networks that could contribute. It might be churches, it might be social groups, in some cases it might be even sports clubs. It could be schools, it could be PTAs, it could be a whole bunch of things. Imagine that we identify those and we train those people to respond. That in case there is a disaster, we activate, the local leaders, let's say it might be the rabbi, the imam, the priest, or the pastor, whoever is in charge, and we activate them in case of a disaster. We could train them. We could train them in first aid, risk mitigation, humanitarian logistics, etc., etc. And we activate them and need it. That will solve a number of problems. Typically, when I go to disaster, I found, hundreds of stories of people who are walking in the midst of the total destruction. Trying to find a place. They heard, maybe in Belfort, we heard that they are handing out supplies. And they walk miles and miles just to find out that there is nothing there. And then they go to another place. And you see, pre-identifying what will be the bugs in the case of disaster is crucial. Because you don't have time to set them up. And if you engage them, they will provide the manpower. They have the local credibility. The element of trust is crucial. The churches that we identify, they were able to organize the locals. And because of that credibility, they will basically tell the locals, okay guys, in the next delivery, you're going to get supply. And everybody they maintain order because of the trust. And basically their participation is essential. It is true that basically because of, let's say, religious affiliation, for instance, they might feel inclined to help their people. But again, you could counteract that if you provide some sort of like a VOAD framework in which you have all the churches, not only the evangelical, but the Catholics and the Muslims and the Jewish. If you provide some sort of cooperative environment that somehow makes sure that the allocation of resources is fine, all of that is gone. Because in reality, the fundamental thought is that distributing aid in an effective manner is exactly the same problem that you have in the circulatory system. You have big arteries transporting blood, and then you have a massive amount of tiny capillary vessels that move tiny amount of blood to each cell in the body. This network has the capillary vessels, but they lack the blood. And basically, the international organization has the blood, but lack the capillary vessels. And the idea is to help them correct.
Well done. I think he has nailed it. But I just want to add also that, so the key is pre-planning. So if before the disaster, you already planned
the voluntary organizations that have been called up, the different groups that are represented within the planning, and they're part and parcel of the planning process. I think at that point in time, you can identify and make sure that you're covering all your base in terms of the vulnerable population and all that. And in terms of just trying to remember what UN did, in Haiti especially, initially the distribution was the chopper style. You saw that, the picture you put there, that you were just dropping relief supplies on hilltops. And who gets there first? Is the fetus. It's like the survival of the fetus and the elimination of the unfit. So the women, the pregnant women, those with children, they could not get the resources. The people are getting were the strong men. And what were they doing? They were turning around and selling those supplies to women and children and pocketing the money. So what UN did eventually was to tell people to come, was to tell each household, the women in each household, to actually be the ones to come for the resources. Okay? So the women were showing them, and they were giving them rice and oil and cooking oil and all that. Because they know that the women, when they get it, they'll feed their kids and perhaps they'll feed their husband too. Yeah. But if the husbands get it, they'll sell it and pocket the money. The woman will not see it. So that actually worked a lot. So.
And this is also another element you mentioned that relates to accountability. There is a philosophical conflict between effectiveness and efficiency. If you want to be efficient, you want to control the aid from the beginning till the end. If you want to be effective, that might not be necessarily the best path. Let me tell you the case of Operación Mano Amiga. Operación Mano Amiga was the like friendly hand, Operation Friendly Hand, was basically the operation undertaken by the Dominican government that you should recognize the Dominican government, because they did a fantastic job, by the way. They basically activated upon hearing about the earthquake, they activated the response plan. And they realized very quickly that they will not be able to distribute supplies in Port-au-Prince because they didn't have the local network. And they basically went ahead and in a really frantic, a period, basically they were able to find out a local partner that happens to be the lady that was the Minister of Women Affairs. And they said, they struck a deal. We're going to give you all the supplies and you do the local distribution. It might be that a percent of that supplies were used for other purposes. And they said, we are going to wash our hands. We are going to, they might be a loss. But I think it's better to be effective than to be efficient. Because if we try to be efficient and you don't have the local network, we will have to do it ourselves. And we don't have the capability. And let me tell you, that works fairly well. In spite of the fact that basically there may have been losses and misuses and who knows what. And in this situation, I think it's more important to be effective than efficient. That's right.
Thank you.
Well, following on this discussion, I'm a little worried about the concept of looting, because the word looting is often applied to what people in lower classes do rather than what people in upper classes do to feed their families. And I'm wondering if again, we label some activities as looting, we would be spending time and getting police resources, whatever, to corral those individuals who are doing the looting rather than providing those same resources, the police resources and distribution of aid and all of that. And I'm wondering if anyone has done research on this concept of looting to make sure that indeed those things that are really looting, the greedy and horrifying activities of individuals who are really stepping beyond the boundaries of feeding their families and all of that, if we can label that and again corral that as opposed to stopping all of that work that individuals are doing to feed their families.
I'd like to respond to that. There honestly has been an awful lot of research done, mostly by sociologists, on this whole question of looting. It's Corantelli, and it's also Gary Krebs, and it's, a number of sociologists have looked at it. And what they have found is that basically in the first days of a disaster, people aren't looting. They're trying to help one another and they're trying to survive. you know, I think, I particularly looked at the whole case of Katrina, where there were, you know, big news reports saying looting in New Orleans, et cetera, et cetera. And here the difference was honestly where white couples came in taking diapers and powdered milk and water for their families, and they were, it was self-organization, it was community resilience. Black couples came in looting, you know, terrible. And it was all done in Walmart, where Walmart had said, you know, look, the store is open, you know, we can't sell it, the cash registers aren't working, you need supplies, you know, take it. And so this was really, I think, a misinterpretation. I will say there is a different response in different countries and in different cultures. And, you know, I looked at this in Indonesia, and in fact, what is the case is that in some instances, especially when there's been a lot of resentment and a difficult political system, you do get people that are saying, you know, look, the government's out of control. At this point, I'm going to help myself. It's almost revenge. You know, I'm certain that happened to some extent in Haiti. It actually, in New Orleans, there was some looting, but that was, I'm sorry to say, the 60,000 drug addicts in the city who were without their supplies, and in order to stay alive, they were resorting to whatever means they could get to get some cash. So we do have elements of this, and it's probably more characteristic in systems where you've already got a fragile government, where they're, you know, in Haiti, the local police had literally been put on retainer. Nobody believed them, nobody trusted them, nobody paid taxes to pay them, and you know, it was being totally reformed. And so I'm not certain that the question of looting is the key question. I think the key question is the one that Jose and Pete have identified, is the distribution network. My concern is if you wait until after the disaster,
Too late.
that's too late. So engaging them ahead of time, planting trees, you know, planting vegetables in, you know, on the streets or something.
You need to engage them before. One of the responders, in fact, was a priest. He said, a capsize is not the moment to learn how to swim. And to me, that kind of encapsulates the whole thing, you see. And basically, as you said, basically, that's an actual quote for that. And you need to engage them beforehand, you need to prepare them. And let me tell you, they're willing to do that. I mean, that guy who told me that quote, he said, I mean, we would like to distribute supplies, and neither the government nor the international organization basically are geared for that, because basically many international organizations are geared to do government-to-government operations. Government to, let's say, churches, you know, it's also it's more of a change for them. I am not saying all, but basically there is a problem with that, because of the issue of accountability and all.
Just quickly, yes, I will take it in a moment, please. I just want to say that the research that we did in Haiti, we found that there was evidence of looting. Just to set a background, the Haiti destroyed the prison system, some prisons. Over 4,000 people escaped, inmates escaped, and so it was hard to, and so those are the ones I think were engaged in those activities. For instance, when one of the schools that we visited and interviewed the rector for that, director for the school, assistant rector actually, he said students that were killed during the earthquake. Some people came by, put their hands in their corpses, trying to look for money and all that, and so there was that a little bit of that. So yeah, let's.
Oh, I just adding on to the social network. One element that also worked out very well were those the international development NGOs that were already on the ground, had already these long-standing relationships with the locals, and they were found to actually perform a whole lot better than those that were coming in from the outside. So, I mean, I think they definitely need to be held in terms of establishing those long-term, long-standing networks ahead of time.
Yeah, but there is a major, I agree with that, to their performance, but also there is a major difference in terms of size. How many churches would you guess? I just remember the evangelical church. How many churches do you think are in the Dominican Republic of Haiti? 11,000. 11,000. You have a network that may have 500,000, 1 million, depending on how you're talking about massive. You see, basically a network like this dwarf by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude the extent of any NGO. You see, but the difference is tremendous. And basically, if we want to get ready, and these people are willing to help out. I mean, just a matter of engagement, train them, designate the locales as spots in case of, you could train them in humanitarian logistics, first aid, risk mitigation, education, development, a whole bunch of things. They are, in my opinion, they are the key.
All right, thank you. I would like to thank all the presenters this morning for